I think they want to basically say we need to get back to business with China. There's been a lot of rhetoric for several years between the U.S. and China. There's been a lot of changes in the relationship. It's very frosty lately. A lot of restrictions on what you can and can't sell to China, restrictions on travel, restrictions on a lot of what you can invest in China if you're a U.S. company. And there's a lot of companies who are looking at this and saying, look, we want to make sure that there's a market there for what we sell. We want to make sure that our supply chain can remain unrestricted, relatively open. We want to make sure that there's going to be things like IP protection, that our technology isn't going to get ripped off. On the other hand, the U.S. government is very concerned about Chinese leadership in some key areas, particularly chip manufacturing. So major restrictions on the access that Chinese companies have to the technology that they need to make these chips. Another thing that we're increasingly seeing more of is concerns about leadership in the area of artificial intelligence, this emerging technology where U.S. companies have shown a lot of leadership, but there's a lot of competition from China. So lots of areas of tension, but lots of areas where U.S. companies want to turn over a new leaf and want relations to, at the very least, be conducive to them doing business there.
It's interesting, and I think about the different leaders that we watch at this interesting time in the U.S. economy, global economy, with a lot of tensions, geopolitical and others, if you will, out there, and trying to figure out kind of what comes next, how many years out of a pandemic still, where we're still feeling the adjustments going on. Having said that, we look at a leader like Jamie Dimon, who right now is speaking to our team in Mexico. In an interview, he is saying people are overreacting to short-term numbers on inflation, the Fed doing the right thing to pause rate hikes right now. So some context in terms of that conversation that's going on. Having said that, Thomas, tech leaders are also really good cues about what might come from the economy based on what you were seeing in their interest in terms of having access to Xi and other Asian leaders. Tells you what in terms of their outlooks and what's going on, especially when it comes to some of the geopolitical concerns?
Companies want to do business in China. It's a huge market. It's the factory to the world. But I think there were some wake-up calls during the pandemic when a lot of that factory to the world was shut down. And then we had Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and China has been backing Russia. I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of companies to say what could happen to this relationship, especially when you think about Taiwan. So there's a lot of C-suites that are thinking of some plan Bs on what to do in case some of these some of this relationship breaks down further. So I think they want to say, look, we want to do business with you, but we need to have certain assurances that we're going to be able to have a 5-year business plan. It's not going to be torn up somehow because we have a change in the rules. So they need certainty. And they want to do business in a big market like that.
But Thomas, it's one thing to actually have a plan B and talk about it in the C-suite, and then it's another thing to kind of move out of this world's second largest economy, which we've seen since the pandemic, and even the Chinese economy certainly has had its own struggles, but we see companies not necessarily doubling down, but not quite decoupling, and not even close, even if they are doing some quote unquote nearshoring or starting to build a few iPhones in India, for example.
I think there's some nibbling around the edges, but it's really hard to decouple from China because the whole supply chain is there. It's a one-stop shop manufacturing area. So it's very difficult for companies to pull up root from there.
Right. Just ask Tim Cook, who, Tom Giles, interestingly enough, is not going to be there.
Well, he's been to China twice this year already,
I know,
Carol.
but still, it's interesting.
We don't have any indication that he will be there. The Apple is sending an executive who is well versed in U.S.-China relations. But no, as far as we can tell, Tim Cook will not be there. You will have a lot of other very senior tech executives who are scheduled to be speaking at the CEO summit. I will just say there is a distinction between getting in front of this audience, getting addressing the CEO summit and going to the dinner with Xi. That is going to be happening tomorrow evening. As we've reported, the question is who's going to be at that dinner. We're looking to break some news on that. So just because someone is going to APEC does not mean necessarily that they're going to be at the dinner. We are told that there's spaces for several hundred executives to sit down and dine with President Xi. And we're told that it's a hot ticket and that there's a long waiting list, and we'll be looking to break news on exactly who will be going to that.